and so as her, and it sort of metaphorically got this centralized little, like almost like claws in different elements of our history as well. Like, for instance, the one that's just popping in my head right now, because it had a small connection to the Great Heist story, was Lindbergh learned to fly, the man who flew across the Atlantic Ocean, or the first one to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. He learned to fly in Nebraska. In fact, the airfield was where my grandfather is now buried. It's now a graveyard. I'm actually have hard pressed to remember some of the other little things. There's all these little stories that it's like when you hear about, the Charles Starkweather story, which is the inspiration to a lot of legends and stories. I mean, Stephen King's entire career comes from the Starkweather story because he was so scared of it when he was a kid. That's when the Starkweather thing happened, and it was national news. I mean, even international news. He was just very afraid of Starkweather, and he became obsessed with them, and that's what that kind of those nightmares and that fear he felt for that is what inspired him to be a horror writer, to make everybody else that scared. Let's see, what was it? Anyway, but
Peter
that
Jackson.
Story. I'm sorry. Peter Jackson was inspired, right? But in fact, actually, this is one I've been wanting to. I actually wrote to all these people, trying to find out their connection. And Peter Jackson's the one I want to find out the most, partly because I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. But his movie The Frighteners, which was his first major Hollywood movie, was about two people who were trying to be like Starkweather and Fugate. And
Bartlett, too.
Yeah, exactly. And there's another irony about that as well, that Badlands, which is inspired by the Starkweather story, that was Martin Sheen's first breakout role, and then the role he's probably always going to be known for the most is as President Bartlett, which was Caril Fugate's mother remarried a guy named Bartlett. Those were the victims. So it's just all these bizarre ironies. But like in the case of Peter Jackson, his first Hollywood movie that he and his wife wrote is about two people trying to be Starkweather and Fugate, and they wrote it while living in New Zealand. So from all the way in New Zealand, they became so I don't want to say inspired, but they that story is so affected them that they made their first major movie about that. And actually, there's a ghost character in that, which was the reason they ended up making Lord of the Rings. Because once that movie was successful enough, it was like, okay, what do you want to make next? They were like, well, we've already got this ghost figure in our computer, database or our hard drive. He looks like a ring wraith. Why don't we make Lord of the Rings? Why don't we just copy that 9 times? And the rest will be simple, But anyway, and so I've always wanted to ask him, okay, what inspired? Why'd you want to, of all of the things you could do something on, why that? But of course, so that was this big story. It was all, all over the place. The largest bank robbery, Al Capone's brother, and you always hear about some people who were from there that it's like, oh, that's interesting. Johnny Carson was from there, and he has his whole history of moving up through radio there and all that sort of thing. And my father could just rattle off all these historical elements from Nebraska, and now I'm drawing a blank. But if you go through Nebraska history, you run across these little things that are kind of like, really? I thought that was just corn there. But there's like all these little things that just kind of happen there. And I mean, the place itself is a bit different than people realize, I think. There's eastern Nebraska is Lincoln and Omaha, and it's, much more metropolitan than people realize. And there's a lot more going on in terms of the entertainment and things that people like to do. It's hard to, it's oftentimes hard to put into words because it's not touristy. It's just interesting. It's just the kinds of things that people like to do. And it's just sort of different from you expect. I usually, whenever I see people envisioning Nebraska through some movie or play or whatever, it's a bunch of people sitting around in a cornfield or, just watching the flies get zapped in the zapper. And I'm like, no, that's not even close to what my childhood was like. I grew up in the theater, and we, were performing shows all the time. In fact, there were some shows that I felt were better done in our community theater than I ended up seeing in New York, where I went to school. So, Anyway, yeah, it's hard to describe, but it's a bit different than I think people realize. So.
Yeah, because it's not such a media capital, it's interesting that, and this is my personal opinion, that in the Starkweather case, and it's kind of the last thing on Starkweather here, is the Starkweather Fugate case. It kind of, for me, I don't know how to describe it any other way, it kind of began, to me, the beginning of media darlings as far as these types of murders go. Now, I know Ed Gein existed before that, H.H. Holmes, all that, and we can go on and on, but it felt like this was the one that really kicked off the media storm about these types of situations.
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, part of it is, too, the connection it has to when television was just getting going. I mean, it was the first televised interview with a person accused of murder. It's the first time that television news started to gain some respect and started to get known, and all sort of thing. I also feel that Ninette Beaver is a very important part of it. She was the female reporter who covered this the most. And just the fact that in the 1950s, the person leading this, who was sort of in the center of all this in terms of media, was a woman, or was a female reporter who, in the 1950s, they weren't expected to do that sort of a thing. It was a lot of really interesting elements to it, and like you say, the fact that it just got known everywhere was kind of the first of its kind, which, like you say, other people will factually say. I was mentioning this to my girlfriend when I first got together with her, and was trying to explain to her that this is a big deal and why it was a big deal. And each of the things, like, she sort of pointed the ones out that you were talking about. It's like, yeah, this one happened before that, and that happened before that. Yeah, but this was the first time that it just became like household names, particularly because this is the time when people started locking their doors. You'll hear people wax poetic about the 1950s. Oh, it's so safe and so great, you could just leave your doors unlocked and stuff like that. It was the Starkweather killings that caused people nationwide to feel like they needed to lock their doors, and it became much more of the we have to stay safe, and murderers themselves feeling like, hey, I can get on TV if I can get nationally known, and Starkweather kind of, in a way, proved that by the fact that people were more interested in hearing his multiple lies than in hearing expert testimony.
Odd thing, too, that happened in 1958, and then the next year, in 1959, was the Clutter family murders in Kansas. So,
right.
That was because of an unlocked door, and it was a time, when people would leave their doors unlocked, and that was, if the Starkweather thing started the end of the unlocked doors, that was kind of the nail in the coffin to it. So, yeah, I mean, the heartland there has, it may be a kind of a quiet place, but, it kind of brought a lot of things, reality into the forefront to the American public, I feel like, even if, it's inaccurately portrayed throughout time.
Right, yeah, no, you're right. It is interesting because it's kind of this quiet kind of thing, but it's got, what's funny too is that people from Nebraska tend to have this kind of weird pride, like in school, people would always, in New York, people would always comment on, man, I knew people were, had state pride and wherever they're from, California or Florida or whatever, but you take it to a whole new level, Jeff, with Nebraska. And now out here, there's like a group called Nebraska Coast Connection, and it's made up of people from Nebraska who moved out here to get in the film industry and stuff. And if you've ever seen the films by Alexander Payne, he almost always makes his movies in Nebraska. You have other filmmakers from other states who go to, come out to L.A. and then they make movies about whatever. But, our Nebraska boy ends up making movies about Nebraska. So, it is a weird kind of pride that we all have, whether we intend to or not. Even my girlfriend and I, we're not that much into like football or anything like that, but yet we still have Cornhusker paraphernalia. We just can't help ourselves.
It's part of the culture.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Definitely true. That's kind of how basketball is in our state. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. So, yeah, I understand. Even the people that don't like basketball, they're still wearing either Louisville or Kentucky. So one way or another, you're part of the rivalry around here. So yeah, it's the same type of situation. But Jeff, I tell you what, you killed it. Well, no pun intended, for almost an hour and 40 minutes at this point. And yeah, I just wanted, if there was anything else you wanted to throw out, I mean, feel free. It's your time. But if not, I want to tell you to have a great night, and have a drink to 60 years of this craziness.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's funny because my father, actually, the way he put it was that this kind of has gone into legendary status, in that, I mean, we always want to maintain the truth, but at a certain point, it's sort of become part of the culture. And, as much as we want to sort of control the narrative and say, well, look, here are the facts, at a certain point, it's just like any story, like Jesse James or anything like that. There was what happened, and then there's the story that, the stories that people, share and talk about. And there are a lot of these Old West kind of stories that everybody knows that the version that they hear isn't the real story, but at a certain point that it doesn't matter to them anymore. To them, it's just a story, it's just a story. They're not meaning anything personal about it. But those who really want to know the true story need to look at the facts and then make the judgments based on the facts. But yeah, at a certain point, a lot of these things become just legends, and they become almost part of the American mythology, if you will. And I think this is one of those.
No doubt about it. Well, Jeff, I look forward to talking to you again, because you have multiple other books and multiple books that I want to talk about with you. So, yeah,
wonderful.
We'll definitely free up some time. I'll give you a break for the rest of the night, and hopefully you get to enjoy your evening and kind of reflect on this whole thing. Because really, honestly, and this is true, I've thought about, what everybody involved felt like, 60 years ago. And so, to me, even though it's not, a momentous occasion like this was a great thing, it is something to think about, and because it did change the course of American history in a lot of ways. So I appreciate you coming in and just, shedding some light on the truth of what happened, or at least, what we know about it.
Right. Well, thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you having me on, and wanting to hear more about it.
All right, Jeff.
Cool.
You take care, okay then, buddy?
You too. Take care.
All right, later on. And, that was Jeff McArthur, author of Pro Bono. And again, it was an 18-year journey for his grandfather regarding Caril Ann Fugate's defense that was, again, pro bono. He wasn't getting paid the standard fee after the trial and everything. I mean, he did this because he believed in her innocence. And what a great story. I mean, a great story in that it's terrible, but at the same time it's interesting. Vic, are you still there, buddy?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What's up?
So yeah, it was week one of the Starkweather 2-week run here, and Jeff gave us week one, and then next week Jeff Simmons, writer of Chasing Starkweather, will be back, or will be here rather, for week two. So we'll talk more about Starkweather next week. This was all about Caril Ann Fugate, the supposed, I say supposed, because we both know that, based on what Jeff McArthur told us, that, Caril Ann Fugate was only a supposed accomplice. And, with the facts that I've been given and the things that I've read, obviously there is reasonable doubt there. It's amazing to me that she wasn't found not guilty. But again, his grandfather, he was in a no-win situation. I would never want to be a defense attorney, even for the right reasons,
Yeah, no doubt. That's just, not for me, I guess.
It's funny that we talked about Peter Jackson and The Frighteners, because that is a movie that's when I found out about Charles Starkweather. I was 15 years old or 14 or 15 whenever The Frighteners came out, saw it in the theater, and there's a quote in there by Johnny Bartlett, which is funny, the Bartlett name, because that was, of course, the name of the first, well, technically, I guess, Starkweather killed somebody at a gas station before all this, but Caril's parents and sister, it was the Bartletts. So this character Johnny Bartlett in The Frighteners says, I got me a score of 12. That's one more than Starkweather. And I was like, who the hell is